So we're joined all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin by hydroponic engineer, SNESB lifetime member, just a resume I'll put up against anybody, Mitchelle Lyle, all the way there in the Dairy State. I've got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School. This is for our computer science engineering class. We're recording this for all of our friends in Madison County schools. My good friend Angela Jordan over there at Shirley Simmons Middle School, Ridgeland High School, Old Town Middle School, Germantown High School, Madison Middle, Madison Central, the Academic Option Center, and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule for us today.
Course, I am very, very happy to be here. Thank you so
Now,
much.
before we go, and you're very welcome. Now, before we get into all it is and explaining what hydroponics is, because it is extremely interesting, and the little research I've done since we've scheduled this. Just give us a little bit about your background because you did attend the University of Wisconsin. We all know about their sports programs, but a great academic school as well. So just tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
your background in engineering and how you got to where you are now.
absolutely. So yes, I'm a very, very proud Badger. From Milwaukee, Wisconsin, born and raised, and did my undergrad and master's program in industrial and systems engineering from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Really excited to kind of share my journey. There has been a number of turns throughout, even while I was a student. So I was very sure that I wanted to be an engineer to begin with. I was also studying French at the time. And so I took a pivot and said, okay, I want to know what it's like to be a French teacher for a little while. I went to the business school for a little while and then circled back to engineering because that was truly where my passion was. So I always encourage students to explore, even if they, start pre-engineering, pre-med, etc., to explore those other things and see if something else is ignited in the process. And maybe it's not, and then you come back to where you started, which should just help you uh really double down on what your thoughts were to get the degree complete. But yeah, so graduated from there, did my undergrad and master's consecutively, went on to work for GE Lighting for a number of years, had tons of different roles in sourcing, in the manufacturing side on new product introduction, transition to working on LEDs, replenishment for DCs and fulfillment, a scheduler, a buyer, a purchasing manager. I've done just about everything in supply chain, except direct warehousing. I think that's the only thing I haven't done yet was direct warehousing.
Now, you mentioned your time at the University of Wisconsin, and you were an engineering major, but you were
Yeah.
also a member, and you're still a member of the National Society of Black Engineers. Now, one thing I like to hit on as kids make their college choices is it's important to look at student organizations while you're in college, because obviously the academic side is extremely important to have a great GPA, but also to get the professional networking, start to get some internships, make connections within your field. And here in Mississippi, we mentioned before we came live, Mississippi State does have a great NSBE program, as does Jackson State and Ole Miss here in Mississippi. And I went to LSU in Louisiana, again PWI, but again a very active and very large NSBE organization. So tell us a little bit about how that student organization works and how similar organizations can really get kids plugged in. And again, even if they don't do the HBCU route, because we're a big supporter of HBCUs, the PWIs also have a great way for these students to get involved in a field that desperately needs diversity.
Absolutely. So UW-Madison is a predominantly white institution, as you could imagine, right? Being in the capital of Wisconsin. Um, but I will say that the National Society of Black Engineers chapter there was very dominant and important for my experience. Um, all of the engineering students that identified as Black, and even some of who didn't, to be totally honest, um, we believed in our mission statement, in terms in supporting each other, building that community on campus that wasn't always evident, and getting the support we needed. One of the things that did happen during my time, and unfortunately from talking to younger students still happens, is that there is segregation in the classroom, and there is a lot of being the only one in your mechanical engineering class or your electronics, etc. Um, in engineering, it's a lot of teamwork, right? You rarely know how to create a new robot from beginning to end without consulting with other people, without a lot of that brain work and creativity with other teammates. And if people in the classroom don't want you to be on their team or isolate you in the team, that really makes things challenging in terms of having a successful project in the end. So that's something that our our community of Nesby really closed the gap on, right? Like being a safe space to ask questions, being a safe space to get support from homework, to get some ideas on the different projects you were working on from upperclassmen. We usually had study sessions all week, of course, during like the midterms and finals time. But even during the week, we would say, hey, we're all just going to study together on this day. And you had that opportunity to be able to connect with upperclassmen to understand what their experience
Yeah.
was like in this class. And they can give you advice on how to approach the different problems. So Nesby was great. We also partnered a lot. So we learned a lot about collaboration with the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers ship. Our offices happen to be right next to each other when we're talking about the student org offices. So they were right next to each other, and we both didn't have a massive amount of numbers, right? So when we wanted to do
Wow.
something that we felt impactful on campus, we usually did that together. And it just really helped us with extending our community, building our community within Nesby, but extending it and having empathy for another isolated group that didn't have as many students on campus that identified as them and faced a lot of the different challenges that we did through a similar lens. So those student organizations and networks are really important. I leaned in a lot in Nesby in terms of advancing in leadership. There is a board. I've been secretary, I've been pre-college initiative chair, I've been president on the undergrad level. And those are all skills in terms of management, soft skills, um, adjusting to different, building that versatility to different personalities, communication styles, etc. when you're a part of these organizations. And there are many others, Engineers Without Borders was a really cool one. So there's a ton to choose from, and wherever you find your tribe, it's really important. But I
Yep.
would say, as much of an advocate for Nesby that I am, explore and really find the tribe that speaks to you, that energizes you, and that helps you get through those tough days, especially as a college student.
Yeah, and the amount of networking through internships, a lot of these companies want to get Nesby students or ship students or just engineering students, period,
Yep.
into their companies to give them experience to see if they really like what they're doing and maybe hire them after their internship. So getting involved in things like that can only help you as a college student. Um,
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, my big question is I have no idea what hydroponics engineering is. So, I've seen some pictures. I've read a little bit about it. I know it's you're growing plants through nutrients instead of the soil, like we see on farms. We're down here in Mississippi. We got plenty of farms. And then I
Right.
got a friend in California. He's got plenty of farms out in the Central Valley, but you can't put a farm everywhere. So, tell us
Yeah.
about hydroponics. Why it's such a cool growing field, and really why it's needed. Because until I reached out to you, I really never thought about it.
Yeah, so hydroponics, I come from a gardening family. I'm second generation from Mississippi actually, here in Wisconsin. So we've gardened. I'm used to having fresh produce all the time from either an aunt's or my sister's. Someone's garden was always dropped off, and then I started to do it as well. And the thing about gardening or just overall agriculture is that there is a science behind it, right? There's something happening when that seed is put in the soil, the type of nutrients that is being sucked into the skin of that seed to be able to start that germination process, then it's a sprout, then you're actually growing. And and we don't think about it because it's it's happening on its own so well, right? Um, all we knew is that we probably planted something last year and it came back and then it's gonna come back the next year. And if it works, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Which I understand and I appreciate. But when you're coming from a space like Milwaukee, it's very industrial. There's not as much green space as we would like. I think that depending on where you are in the city, some yards are much bigger than others or smaller rather than others. So you don't really have that space to garden. And then just the way time and the daily culture of people and having the time to manage kids and work and garden and being able to garden enough to feed yourself substantially it's an issue, right? So I think and it came for me like transitioning from gardening to transition to hydroponics themselves came from me not having a ton of time with my garden and it overgrowing. I'd actually fallen ill for a while. So trying to catch up with the weeding and the harvesting and everything in a recovery mode at that was a huge challenge for me. So I just opted to try to find opportunities at home and I kind of dabbled into hydroponics, which we do. So before I even get into more of the engineering side of hydroponics, we do this at home often, right? We've seen that onion start to sprout because it's been left in the cabinet for too long, right? And we put it in water and now we have a whole new onion with fresh greens on top. That is hydroponics at its simplest form, right? There's no dirt involved. Everything that that onion needs is already inside of it. Those roots
Wow.
begin to sprout on their own, and we just continue to give it that oxygen when we put it in that bowl or cup or whatever, and now we have it, right? Um, the units that we work with are a lot more sophisticated because it's a lot more water involved, right? So you have to have like a motor to keep the water going, whether you're working with an air stone. My students usually use air stones because they're a small motor and an air stone because their units are so much smaller. But when you're working with much larger units and easily I think I can get up to 10 gallons of water depending on which unit I'm working with. That water needs to continuously move, right? Otherwise you're going to get an overgrowth of algae and then you have this swamp in your living room. You don't want a swamp. So so that motor is engineering in itself, understanding fluid dynamics of how fast that water needs to go to engage with those roots so that it gets enough oxygen. Pulling
Wow.
oxygen into the water is engineering as well. The soil that we're in, and maybe you guys have kind of heard this or have seen your parents do this when they kind of rotate where they're growing because that soil changes. It needs to be replenished. If you're growing that same thing in that same spot, you're going to deplete that soil over time and your crops, aren't going to be as robust as they were. So the depletion of nutrients, whether it's nitrogen or copper or what have you, we're adding that in its concentrated form to the water. So even though we're not working with soil, it's there. And even though we're not, kind of doing the word is escaping me, but you split the way you're growing because some plants need more of one nutrient versus the other, and that's how you can balance the soil. I'm forgetting what this process is called, but we're doing that as well, right? So what am I planting? Am I planting strawberries or all herbs, or do I want to do leafy greens, right? Tomatoes use a ton of water, a ton of water in hydroponics, because it's just a very juicy fruit. So how do I make sure I'm balancing my pH? I'm understanding the EC, the electric conductivity in my water. Do I have too much nutrients where I need to dilute it a bit because it's so much, it's kind of suffocating the roots in a sense because the other water and oxygen can't get through. And all
Wow.
of this is science, right? All of these things from building the units, making sure water is flowing, making sure you have an appropriate motor, balancing pH, balancing your electric connectivity. You know, it goes back to science. But again, when we're thinking about that seed that we've put in the earth and it just sprouts on its own, it's so unbeknownst to us that we haven't taken a step back. And that's what I really enjoy about hydroponics because we're mimicking what's happening in soil, but we have to understand what's happening in soil first so that we can appropriately mimic it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so cool that it really does mix science, engineering, and agriculture. And I know here in Mississippi, we have two great agricultural schools, Alcorn State University, HBCU, and Mississippi State University, which we mentioned as well, because in a lot of areas of the United States, there's a food shortage. These communities need fresh food items. These restaurants need fresh food items. You know, produce is always going to be at a premium. So we need young people to get into this type of field to learn how we can feed our communities. People are always going to need to eat in a variety of
Always.
backgrounds. And just me looking at some of the things that hydroponics does just in the last few days, there is a ton of technology in this and a ton of research and development. And it's, people think growing food and they think they're all out in the sun getting tired, but this is a very scientific, uh, job that is very technology driven.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like hydroponics themselves are in the house, or at least the ones I use, rather. There are some that you can put out and have them on a balcony and things, but all of the units that I use are all indoor. They vary in sizes. I have some tabletop ones, and then I have larger ones like the one kind of sitting behind me. Um, so just combining all of those things. The thing that really got me started with doing this in Milwaukee, was that even though I didn't come from a well-to-do family, because we gardened, being hungry was not a problem that we faced, right? It definitely closed that gap from an economic standpoint. Milwaukee has 13 food deserts in its main metropolitan area. And we are really trying to combat that, like the city of Milwaukee is, but it has become such an issue that there's still gaps, right? And as much as we're trying to open up new food sources, other ones are closing. So we've kind of remained flat over time. And with that, the health disparities in these areas have continued to decline. The neighborhood that I'm from actually, uh, in terms of, I think the data was last year or the year before, it was 55% obese in comparison to the rest of the city. But and then if you drive through that area, there's not a lot of grocery stores. There's mostly gas station and convenience stores. And even the grocery stores don't have a ton of organic produce, right? Hydroponics um has been considered organic by the USDA. So you're eating this fresh produce, right from your living room, because a lot of these areas as well is uh, low income. So they can't afford cars. They're walking to most of the places, and the grocery stores are out of walking distance, right? So you eat what you have access to. So that really comes from like that shortage and lack of ability to connect with people. And this is one of my offices, but I don't know if you can tell, but that's tomatoes. Let me take my blur off here if I can. I'll figure that out. But I want to show you that this is that I'm growing tomatoes right indoors behind me.
That's incredible.
Get my choose my virtual background. There we go.
There we go. Oh, that's pretty cool.
You have tomatoes here. So you can
Wow.
grow fruit also in a hydroponic unit.
Wow. And and especially, and I'm not a climate expert by any stretch, but you hear a lot of people say, well, our climate isn't conducive to growing XYZ. Hydroponics, from what I can tell, gives you the opportunity to have these things in a controlled environment, and you can, for if tomatoes need a certain condition to grow in, it seems like hydroponic engineers and hydroponic scientists are the ones that are giving them that environment in order to have the best product possible.
Absolutely. And I kind of look at it as um giving honor to those environments, right? Because in order for me to replicate it appropriately, I need to study it, I need to understand it. I need to understand, why that environment is as important as it is for me to be able to replicate it in the first place. So with the climate that change that is happening right now, with the food shortage that is also happening right now, I think even seeking that understanding will give us a better appreciation for what's happening in our world today, and in our communities directly, so that we can not just apply it to hydroponics, but be able to take better care of what we currently have before there is a mass erosion of the resources that won't come back in some cases.
Absolutely. Now, before I get to the students' questions, the last thing I want to talk about is as these kids are getting through high school and going to college or community college, wherever they choose, what are some of the technological advances that are going to be happening or that you've already seen in this field? Because we've already mentioned about how much of a need it is, and technology is always changing. So, for these kids that are like, this might be something pretty cool, what are some advances that we can look to see here in the next few years?
Yeah, there's quite a few hydroponics units out there now. I know I have my favorites that I go to, that I have for my lab as well as at home. But LEDs are a big one, right? When going back to that replicating, the sun is such a powerful, resource for us. It even gives us vitamin D for our bodies, right? So all of these things are really important. Of course, I can't have the sunlight in here, so we use LED lights. That is that having a grow light is the next wave of where technology is going, right? And if you can have a grow light that um best replicates the amazing benefits that the sun is providing to plants for them to operate and function well the way we anticipate them to, that would be awesome. Because of the food shortage, also companies are trying to figure out how to scale these, right? So the ones that I use are um they're large, I would say, like it can feed a family. However, if you want to feed a community, right, you would need things like a grow wall, right? So I know one organization that does have grow walls, and it's it's amazing how much leafy greens they can get out. Even their smaller unit that I have has 144 ports on it, right? So when you think of a grow
Wow.
wall,
It's
it
going
it
up
covers.
instead of out.
Exactly, exactly. And then you're able to get a head of lettuce. I grow collard greens a lot, to be quite honest. I love collard greens.
You do have
So
Mississippi roots then.
I do, I do. So I grow that a lot right in my living room. And it
Wow.
tastes amazing. So if you can figure out one, how to capture the benefits of the resources that we use, how to even like from a chemical perspective, understand the nutrients that we use so that it can feed our plants better and have a more robust crop every time. And then also scaling how much can be grown with a hydroponic unit. That will also help you as well.
Awesome. Well, I do have a few questions from the students. I like all these are good. I like them. This first one is for Sean Smith. He's a senior, and he asked if I'm a senior in high school, what skills would someone need to What skills does someone need to learn in order to get into this field?
Hmm. Skills. Really just be willing to try, right? Like every day with whether it's hydroponics or anything else that's working with STEM, think about your labs, right? Your physics lab, your chemistry lab. You have your goal, right? You have that hypothesis at the very beginning, and then things can go awry, right? And I think every day we're working in here, and that's why we have to test our pH. Is it still at a nice neutral place? We have to test our EC. We have to, balance out our nutrients because we know what that hypothesis is. But if you're rigid in how to maintain your goal or reach your goal, that can create more setbacks for you than not. So being open and understanding that every day is a new lab day at work and you're gonna figure it out.
That's awesome. This is Bryson Stevens. He's in ninth grade, and he asked, "What's the coolest project you've ever got to work on?"
Cool. The coolest project I've ever got to work on. I don't know. I guess I'm starting one. Um, and this is this hydroponic specific or just in my career?
Just in general.
I think okay, so I have two kind of. Um, so I lived in Cleveland for a while. That's where the headquarters of GE Lighting was. And in their theater district, there is a huge chandelier, like an amazingly huge chandelier. You all should Google it. But that was a project that I was on. And it felt really good to drive downtown and be able to tangibly see something that I was a part of.
Absolutely.
The other really cool thing that I was on, um, or that's coming up is being able to partner with a community organization who gives out food in the summer. So every month they give out food baskets, and then in Thanksgiving they give out food baskets. So being able to partner with them to add leafy greens and fresh produce and herbs to their food baskets is a really cool project to me because I know that it's going to the families. I know that everything that I've grown here will be able to support them. And these are people in need. So I haven't
Awesome.
experienced it yet, but this Thanksgiving I'm really excited to be able to contribute.
That's awesome. I've got one more. I love this one. This is Cortez Maxwell. He's in 10th grade, and
Yeah.
he said, "I always thought of, and people always think of engineering as building and materials. So how is engineering connected to agriculture?"
Man. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because that's really my push for this, right? And that assumption is absolutely right. When I say I'm an engineer, people immediately think of buildings. I have never built a building in my life. I've never been on a construction team. But I think that if the idea around being an engineer is problem solving and utilizing different tools to create something new, right? Like that's the way I think of an engineer. And when I'm thinking of agriculture, not just hydroponics, right? And I know I've spoken a lot about that because that's what I've taken a dive into. But there's tons of engineering around the machinery that helps crops be harvested faster, right? Like someone can clear their entire field in a matter of hours because some engineer has come up with a tool that can probably go in between cornfields and pick the corn off as it's driving by, right?
Yeah.
That's what's helping us be able to eat. But again, there a mechanical engineer put that together, understood the stress and strain of that, not only to make the machine work, but to not damage the crop in the process, right? So there's so much that goes into everything that we use um in agriculture, but just in our daily lives that an engineer thought of, drew out and really did a lot of testing to put together across the board. But there's a lot of equipment specifically in the agricultural space, in urban settings as well as in the traditional sense that an engineer has contributed to.
Yeah, and just a quick plug on that. The drone pilots, the drone engineers are a hot commodity right now. And we actually have an unmanned aerial system program at our school
Yep,
district that our students can start taking in 10th or 11th grade and be certified in a lot of drone programs when they graduate high school. And I know
that's
agriculture engineers
awesome.
are always looking for drone pilots. That is something that is very hot right now.
It is. And the drone themselves, right? It's a ton of engineering, right? I feel like the drone is your gateway into being able to fly a helicopter, because of the way you need to balance where you are. And even with agriculture, you can extend that to back to construction, where people need to get a larger picture of what do they need to build, how much space do they have, what does the roof look like? Does something actually need to be torn down so you can get a better landscape of what the project needs to be? So I mean, I honestly contribute my background in engineering to support me in being able to do everything that I've done thus far in my career, this venture that I've been able to really dive into and use a lot of the skill sets that I've used throughout my career and my college career as well, and whatever else, right? I continue to strive and push myself forward, and want to make sure other young people, high school students from my community have that same exposure to pique their interest and see engineering through a different lens other than the construction.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost out of time, and we thank you so much for joining us. But just a couple of things before we go. First of all, obviously, because you're such a big NSBE member, tell us where they can
Yeah.
get more information on NSBE, especially those that are getting ready to go to college, but even our middle school students to start getting some information on NSBE now.
Yes. Oh, so Nesby is broken into regions, and excuse me if I'm wrong, but I believe Mississippi is in region 3. So if you go to nesby.org, and then at the top you will see region 3, Mississippi should be in there, and connect with the universities, whether it's Alcorn, Mississippi State, whichever, because you're in high school, you're able to join Nesby Junior. I actually started as Nesby Junior in high school myself.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, so you're able to get exposure to it right now. There are fall regional conferences happening. Wisconsin is in Region 4, so I don't know everything that's going on in dates for Region 3, but all of that information will be there. And then our nationals will be in Chicago, March 3rd. And you're definitely welcome to come. This will be our 50th year. We'll be turning
Wow.
50. So it will be a great celebration of the achievements and advancements of engineers in general, but you'll get a sneak peek on everything that I've talked about, and then all of the other avenues you can take engineering.
Yeah, and it's a great way to go ahead and start networking if you're interested in the engineering field. Go ahead and meet some of these engineering professors. So it really is a great way to go ahead and get a glimpse of it. So I'm a huge proponent of NSBE. Like I said, great chapters here in Mississippi and Louisiana and Alabama.
Yep.
So wherever you plan on going to college, if you're interested in engineering, definitely look at NSBE. But before we go,
Yep.
one last thing.
Mhm.
Obviously, this is all new to me, and I encourage everybody to look up hydroponics and just look at some of the pictures of the cool things that you guys do. But why is this a field that these young people should consider getting into?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a dual benefit for me. Engineering in general is I think it's boundless. Like you can do engineering and become a lawyer. I know a lot of my friends that I did undergrad with went to law school afterwards. You can go for engineering and become a business owner because we become very great at processes, organization, and being able to see something from beginning to end. Um, And then specifically agriculture, you can do all of those things. It's when you think about supply and demand, people always need to eat, right? That's something that can't be avoided. But then if you think of the social justice aspect of it, um, I consider myself always rich because I always have the means to eat. As long as I can plant something, as long as something is growing, whether it's outside or in a hydroponic unit, um, I I know that I will be able to eat something, and that is one of the biggest gaps that are happening in our less fortunate neighborhoods that are food insecure. That is causing a gap for our students to excel to where they could be.
Absolutely. Such a cool field. And we thank you so much. Um, Mitchelle Lyle, all the way from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, hydroponic engineer, NESB advocate. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy.
Bye bye.